All right, next up on the 66 Lincoln Continental is draining the fuel tank, and that's because it's either empty or there's about 42 years worth of old gas. Good news is it's pre-ethanol, so it's not gonna create that gummy stuff that gets into the lines or gets into the carburetor. But let's go ahead and drain that tank. The first thing I'm gonna wanna do is get under the car and find the gas tank drain plug. I'm now under the car. This is the passenger side, and this is the gas tank. And unfortunately, I do not see a drain plug anywhere on here. Tried to look online for some videos and some content, didn't find any. So I'm gonna get creative about draining this gas tank. The hard fuel lines run along the whole driver's side of the car and come up here just before the fender well here. And what they do is they actually come through, and these are the hard fuel lines. The smaller one's the return, the larger one is what feeds the fuel pump. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect it here, and this is where I'm gonna manually drain the fuel tank. First thing I need to do is get off this sleeve. It's a bone stock sleeve. It's not, there's no break in it, so it has to slide off. So I'm gonna take this nut, or this bolt off, which looks like it's gonna be about I think about a 5/16. Let's get that off. And to make it easy, I'm gonna be replacing these soft lines anyways. So while I was able to get that one out, when I'm trying to push against that, it's pushing against this bracket. So I'm gonna take this bracket out as well, which looks like it's held on by about a 9/16. Out will come the bolt and a washer, and then this bracket will free itself. So that's now out, and these lines should be a little bit easier to move now. It's good I'm going to be replacing these lines. Just putting a little pressure on it, it actually broke the line. So probably a little extra effort on bolting those, but I wanted to do it the right way the first time. But yeah, it's gonna be pretty easy getting these out. As I was working in this middle area, the fuel lines completely broke off at the pump themselves. So now let's just go ahead and get this off, and then we could start manually pumping the old gas out if there is any in there. Now I see different content online about how to remove these hose clamps. Some were putting a screwdriver in here and then using pliers to take them off. Some people were just cutting them off with some dikes. I actually did that for this one. I just used some dikes, kind of played around with it, cut it off a little bit, and was finally able to pull that off. I'm gonna do the same thing on this side now. All right, the lines and the fitting are now off. So this is where I'm gonna connect the manual pump to see if there's any gas in this tank. I didn't already have my own transfer pump, so I picked up this Pittsburgh multi-use transfer pump. It was less than $6, so a pretty inexpensive way to be able to manually drain the gas out of the tank. All right, I have the intake tube set up to the pump, and I have the discharge tube set up to a 5-gallon bucket. So I'm gonna start pumping this to see if we can get any gas out of here. In just over 5 minutes, I got about 4 gallons out of the tank. It appears to be empty, and now it's time to go try and get this tank out of the car. Normally, I like to put jack stands underneath the axle housing. However, given that this tank needs to come kind of out and down in front of that differential or in front of the axle housing, what I'm reading online is that it'll hit. So the best thing to do is let the rear end hang as low as possible, which will also require removing the shocks, letting that rear end hang down low. So what I've done is I have the jack stands under the rear part of the frame. So now I'm going to disconnect the shocks and disconnect the filler tube for the gas tank before trying to take out the gas tank. I now need to remove the filler tube, and in order to get to the gas filler tube, I'm gonna have to remove this piece, which is underneath the carpeting in the trunk. There's only 3 screws that hold on this piece. Now I'm gonna gently pry this up because it's pretty flimsy, and having never been removed, I wanna be super careful trying to take it out. With the insulation now out of the way, to get that filler tube out, it appears that there's 4 bolts that are 5/16, as well as 4 Phillips headed screws. And with a little bit of wiggling out, the fill tube will easily come out easily, but it'll back out as much as necessary in order to be able to get this job done. So I'm just gonna set this off to the side. Excellent. All right, with the fill tube now out, I am going to PB blast both the bolts for the straps. So that is bolt number 1, and over here is bolt number 2. So I'm gonna PB blast those, let it sit for a little bit, and then come back through and try and yank those straps out. So this is the bolt for the strap, and the deep socket for the 9/16 wasn't deep enough to be able to catch it. So I had to go with an open end to get it down to a point where I can now use the wrench or the socket to finish the job. All right, both straps are off of the gas tank. And once that happened, the gas tank already started to move. So it doesn't look like it's gonna take much of an effort to get this out, but I still have to figure out exactly what needs to happen for it to come out. Ah, I see what's going on. There's still a few lines where the sending unit and whatnot is up top. So I'm gonna have to loosen those, and then this tank's gonna drop right out. That's the only thing holding this thing up right now. All right, so the only thing that's really holding this tank in is going to be this right here. So I'm gonna have to disconnect the 2 lines, which is the feed line and the return line, and then it looks like the plug for the sending unit. So I'm gonna get working on that right now. Straps removed, the sending unit unplugged, and all I did was cut the feed line and the return line to the gas tank because they were so brittle. You saw what happened with the lines going to the pump. I just clipped these off. I'll worry about the actual ends later. But this thing should be ready to drop down now. So I got the jack underneath it just to help guide it. Just gonna start lowering it down. Looks like it's gonna drop straight down. Maxed out with what I can do with the jack. Although, it still looks like it wants to get hung up on the diff. But I was reading online that unlike the 64 and 65, the 66 should not require the shocks to be loosened. Looks like we're almost out. And we are out. Done. All right, the tank is now out. As I mentioned, I just cut those lines off. I just ripped off the clamps and then pulled out the sending unit. And as you can see, this thing is gonna need a little bit of love before it goes back in, that's for sure. All right, the gas tank is now out. I'm gonna take that down to a place locally to have it either hot tanked or just cleaned out in general. And then I'm gonna show some love to the sending unit as well. And then we'll be able to get this thing back in there, put on all new rubber lines, and see what we need to do with the fuel pump next.